Hello everyone and welcome to the Literary Salon. This is one of the programmed events in this year's Bray Literary Festival, that's 2020. My name is Phil Lynch, I'm a member of the festival committee and I'll be your host for the evening. But we have a great lineup, 6 writers ready to read for you, and it's my straightforward and pleasant role to simply introduce them briefly and then hand you over to be embalmed by their wonderful way with words. So that's where we're got. So straight away, we start off. Number 1 on the list for this evening is Fred Johnson. Fred is a co-founder of the Irish Writers Co-Operative and founder of the CUIRT Festival. He has published 3 collections of short stories, 4 novels, and 9 collections of poetry, the most recent of which was Rogue States, published by Salmon Poetry in 2019. Fred Johnson.
This is a little poem called At the Tankery Inn. The guitars are put aside. He doesn't do the pubs these days, not since the cancer. When the radio thingy and the hormone business was over, as if the music had been censored out of him. Beach walks with the dog now in all weathers. The sea is a grim business, all suicides and sea wrack, but it suits him. The little hills over the bay, curved like a girl's backside. Before the advent of that ache, days were one come-only, with victory and with melody and in good company, no longing for walks in a face-splitting wind to the dog-yap chorus of his ranting mind. A lewd imp in his ear, where verses used to live. No more of that. Sweat and cigarettes, a late taxi purring like a panther, a guitar in its black case hauling at his arm, a girl's whisper, I would, but I'm married. Under the arc of the linear accelerator, in its click and hum he'd heard time's child's play calling time, and the lock on the pub's door going cluck, and he'd hum himself up with his coat. Oh, for the days of gold, man, raising the roof in the Tankery Inn. In a string break, you'd ladle women into you. Tuning up, you'd tune them up. All music, all of it. A sing-song swell of warm beer. Now, oh, it seems to have disappeared. Yeah. Hello?
Go ahead, Fred, you're on.
Yeah, I can't see anybody. You're all gone. And we're back. Okay. Okay, so we're in the middle of this COVID business, and I'm sure we're all suffering to some extent from it. Certainly at the beginning, the whole thing was so encased in panic and apocalyptic visions. Nobody quite knew what to do, and it was all getting very frantic. So, as a bit of a jest at it all, I suppose, this is a poem called Historia ut remitat nobis. First we fought for toilet tissue, then we fought for bread and cans of beer. We wrestled for cigarettes and postage stamps and left all outstanding bills unpaid, and then we fought for guns. With guns we protected ourselves from the others who wanted to outlive us, and then we turned the guns on ourselves and said, history will forgive us. And the trains and the buses lay where they fell. In the streets where nothing moved, there was a curious order of things settling on the private emptiness of every house. and the stubborn rationale of trees with their unbearable burden of birds. Bells rusted in their towers. Lovers refused the comfort of their beds, and love had no point. Behind our sealed windows, we washed our hands of every duty and desire and read no books. Bells rusted in their towers. The moon and sun went out. Our lamps were lit, but put out no light. And someone foolish opened a door and let in the sound of no one there. Now, let's see. I'm looking for a little poem here I had at one stage. Has it disappeared? I certainly hope not. Now, this is a poem I wrote after a strange experience some years ago where I stood at a friend's door. I stood at a friend's door here in Galway, down by the canal, as it turns out, and heard this singing in choir fashion coming out of the night, as it appeared. It's a poem called Nearer, and I'll finish up with this. I'd like to thank Nessa and everybody involved in putting this festival together. It's terrific. Nearer. Onion rings and cheeseburger and hot paper bags. Coming up the canal, 2 o'clock in the morning. A clear night of fine point stars, comfortably cold. Over. Nearer, my God, to thee. Full choired, an organ heaving under the voices, chimney smoke flimsy from fires going out, a weak ghost light hanging in the empty streets, untrackable verses running up the dark like flags. Called you to the door, the music stopped. A radio, you said, or someone playing records. But the who or why is not important. I fidgeted, sleepless for hours, while the room and the world cradled gently from side to side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fred, getting us off to a rousing start there, cradling us from side to side at the end. So that's lovely. Okay, our second reader is Michael Farry. Michael's latest poetry collection, Troubles, was published in 2020 by Revival Press. His previous collections include Asking for Directions by Doghouse Books in 2012 and The Age of Glass by Revival Press in 2017. Michael's a founder member of the Boyne Writers Group, which of course gives us the wonderful Boyne Berry series as well. So Michael Farry.
Thanks very much, Phil. And hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be taking part in this unique Bray Literary Festival. And I'm going to give you a flavour from that poetry collection, Troubles, which has been published, but not physically launched, if I can use that expression. And that collection deals with the events of 100 years ago in Ireland and our memories and commemorations of that. I've been fascinated by this period for quite a long time. And this first poem asks why I'm fascinated by it and answers the question as well, I think. It's after two poems by the poet Winifred Letts about World War I. Halloween 2019. Why do you wait there in the cold and darkness, alone in the night, reading handwritten answers by people long dead? I am waiting for some who are still on their way, policemen, handballers and dancers, winners and losers, who'll be happy that someone keeps watch, takes the time to listen to statements and stories. What caused one to go, another to stay? What made her do what she did, agree or dissent? Why he claimed the kill, why she tended the enemy's wounds. Someone to parse every step, every choice, the violent, the peaceful, the ballot, the bullet, their words, proclaiming what they called the voice of the people, a dubious, troublesome assertion. I've been particularly interested in the stories of individuals caught up in those great events, like, for instance, an RIC man, a policeman from Coolronan, which is close by to where I live in County Meath, Flat County Meath, who was killed in an IRA ambush in mountainous North Sligo, my native county. And this poem is in his voice. RIC Sergeant Patrick Perry, 56270, a Meath native, killed in the Cliffany ambush, 25th of October, 1920. I am cornered between the mountains and the ocean on this bare strip, exposed, far from the flat security of Coolronan, hanging on for the pension. Gradually, we have become outcasts, the local enemy, caught between careless government and wide-eyed idealists. So we keep quiet here, make no ripples. I suspect that this reported vandalism is a trap, but remind my men of duty. Lead a patrol, 9 cyclists. For a sawn-off cart shaft, I will lay down my life. We took up our greatcoats, sling rifles, faced the merciless October wind, pedaled south towards 40 fellow countrymen behind ditches, intent on making headlines, challenging an empire with shotgun, rifle, and revolver. Just before the Angelus bell, we will reach their position, and they will open fire, killing fathers, sons, husbands, 4 Irishmen about their daily business, earning the king's shillings, pushovers, peacekeepers in this new age when peacekeeping has gone out of fashion. Women who fraternized with the enemy were dealt with harshly by both sides. And the next poem is introduced by an extract from a witness statement from the Bureau of Military History, which is online. I remember at the time young girls from Cork going out to Ballincollig to meet the British soldiers. We curbed this by bobbing the hair of persistent offenders. Short hair was completely out of fashion at the time, and the appearance of a girl with bobbed hair clearly denoted her way of life. Hairdo. The private life is dead as Redmond's scheme. Puritans rampage in Ireland, our heads unbowed. Their English accent is difficult to understand. We have no trust in this regime. Love is not proud. Our boys obsessed with politics and guns, alive today, tomorrow dead. We know the score. It takes a stranger to respect a redhead. No time for life, or love, or fun. We demand more. So shear my loose tresses, my long golden plaits, burn them as incense in a fire. The gossips gloat. We've been comfortable in their empire, desire no truck with Democrats. They lost our vote. The time will come when bobbed hair is in fashion. Who then will dare mock the lovesick? Let them conform. What will lovers suffer in this new republic? Will they ban all show of passion? Survive this storm. And this poem tries to strike a lighter note. I was on a last flight out of a provincial UK airport, and the shops and everything were closing down behind me as we made our way to the plane. The news was full of Brexit at the time, and when I got out, the airplane had propellers. There are mentions of World War I airplanes in this, and there's also the mention of a World War I Irish air fighter. Flying home. At my age, the mind is impossible to control. I'm on the last departure out of Leeds, Bradford, returning after a poetry weekend. Parole from humdrum retirement. My luggage stowed, while behind me the airport closes down, the whole area dropping the shutters, themselves alone. I'm glad to be getting out, but I'm taken aback by the propellers and want to advise the crew how the Sopwith Camel had to be maneuvered until it gained altitude and maneuverability improved. But they're also shuttered in. So I order a snack. Dream I'm Giles Blennerhassett, skilled gunner in a Farman two-seater. The deja vu of wet tarmac, last flights, a free garrison at Brazzaville. I've written extensively on the Irish history of that period, and I'm very aware of the danger of being regarded as one-sided. So I'll end with this poem, which is a response to that feeling. And it imagines a sort of bad dream where the historian is traveling by train from Sligo to Dublin and is met and condemned by all sides from that period. And it uses the phrase, "go for me head on," from Seamus Heaney's poem, The Flight Path, from his 1996 collection, The Spirit Level. And I'll read two of the three stanzas from the poem. The modern Irish historian is condemned in memory of David Fitzpatrick. Free Staters heading for the capital recognize me by the for sale posters and book reviews. Go for me head on. Complain of blatant lies and romantic nonsense glorifying blood and arms. Dead heroes making all the news. Diehards killing for the imagined good. Just tell the truth, he said. How we crazy few stood firm, resolute, faced down the wrecking few, cobbled together a makeshift government, and from the chaos of the malcontents, a free state army. How we met death with death, former comrades who should have known us better. We too saw violence, he said, did our share, then moved down the train towards the dining car. Irregulars ambush the train beyond Ballymote. Identify me by my notebook, pen and laptop. Go for me head on, flat caps at my throat. I'm terrified by their guns, old Lee Enfields. And when the Rolls-Royce armoured car stops, I scream out, convinced my fate is sealed. Just tell the truth, he says. We had our flaws, neither saints nor heroes, fought for the cause and won, or would have won, but compromise betrayed us. Tired people listened to the lies of office men, but we, the loyal crew, the ragtag army, would have seen it through. What you should write, he said, is that we kept our word. They kicked me out at Kilfree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. That was lovely, and taking us back to a past that still resonates somewhat in the present. So moving on, our third reader is Jessamine O'Connor. And Jessamine's new poetry collection, Silver Spoon, is coming out with Salmon Poetry next month. That's October 2020, for those watching in the future. Her poems have been most recently published in Poets Republic, Yakar Press, the OFI Press, Skylight 47, Cormorant, Poet Head, and Blacklight Engine Room, to mention some. She has won the iYeats poetry competition, the Francis Ledwidge, and the Poetry Ireland Butlers Cafe competitions. And this year, a translation of hers won the inaugural McAuliffe Irish language competition in Belfast, I think. And she is studying writing and literature at Sligo IT. Jessamine O'Connor.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks very much. I'm just going to, and also I have to thank, I'm sitting up in my neighbour's B&B, Lochgower Lodge, and they have great Wi-Fi, so that's my circumstances at the moment. And also that I am delighted to be here, but I'm kind of gutted that we're not in Bray, because Bray is my second home. My mum and stepdad have lived in Bray for 16 years. I'm there all the time. I was really looking forward to coming up to read, but next year maybe. But so anyway, I'm going to just start and try and read 4 poems, if that's okay. And I'm going to read the first one because it just came in the post this week from the Poets Republic. And so I'll read that one first. And it's really about, it's kind of like an excuse or an explanation for why I'm always not watching things that people ring me up and say, oh, you should, there's a good documentary on or whatever. So there was, I wrote it just after there was a documentary called One Day in Gaza. It was on, but it was on at 9 o'clock. So I wrote this poem the next day, which was an explanation for why I didn't watch it. Watershed. Learning to live in the world we live in without drowning means choosing canned laughter over One Day in Gaza because it's 9 o'clock. And learning to live to sleep means that. It means no news at night, no documentaries about airstrikes, refugee camps, or hereditary poverty, no children growing in rubble or dinghies drooping into turquoise seas. Learning means avoiding history, current affairs, any futuristic speculation, and definitely steering clear of climate, topsoil, bees, and language. Learning to sleep means closing your eyes to the world at night. There is all day to scream. And the second one I'm going to read is a bit longer, but I wrote it recently after a fairly ordinary visit to the hospital in Sligo. And because I've written very little over the last 6 months, unlike some people, I just have found it really, really hard. And I'm going to read this one. I'm dedicated to Sally in Sligo Cardio. Stress test. There's a rhythmic delicacy to these sketches projecting from my circulatory system. Fascinating for a first-timer. It's hard to take my eyes off them. Once the sparkling woman with the Scots bloom in her vowels scratches patches of my torso with the swab, or is it a toothbrush? Bristles on ribcage feel almost like stubble. And I hoist my t-shirt high and laugh about being glad to have worn the good bra, the one with the gold flecks and correct measurements, because I've been warned. Good bra, comfortable shoes. And these shoes are a perfect ugly match for the grey, gluey pads sticking skin to wires to machine. And with this all done, she demonstrates how to walk, where to rest my hands, not grip, what to expect and when to stop. I walk slowly, watch the squiggles travel leftwards, study numbers which mean nothing to me, feet speeding, thighs catching, hips barely keeping up. Lean into the tilt of the moving track and hope, when sweat begins to brew, that my pores don't fill with last night's drink, emit that vapor into our air. But she doesn't mention anything like that. She only points out the extra beats with splayed fingers, the way you'd point to an unusual butterfly in the garden. Reassures me, these are nothing to worry about. Did you feel that? No. Straps the Velcro round my bicep, blows it up and up, cold stethoscope at the popping part. Read, release, perfect. I slog up the treadmill hill, breathing damply through a plastic mask, nose just jutting over, chatting, trying to chat, gasping, before admitting, that'll do. Slowing down and stepping off. The floor swims. Like a boat, she says. That's exactly how it is. So I sit and watch the jagged scribbles continue bumpily, regular and irregular, delighted with myself for owning this good blood pressure, even under such conditions as an insomniac hangover and face mask, proud of my pumping heart and veins in much the same way as being proud of ancestors who you had no influence on whatsoever. The map keeps writing itself without me, curling in raspberry ripple folds to the floor, black trails tracking where my pulse has just been, but looking a lot more like streams trickling endlessly alongside each other, on and on and on across rocky ground. learning during this test that abnormal rhythm is fairly ordinary, not usually dangerous, and really just the electrical system, being a wild expanse full of butterflies beating their beautiful wings. And this third one is another one I have never read before, but I wrote it about a year ago. Sky burial on a Peckham high-rise. The only flight we will ever take together, the three of us, and the first thing you do on arrival is leave. You leave us for hours with strangers. And when you land back, get straight at it, gouge out on the couch, and only come round eventually to my fury. This was meant to be a holiday, and besides, you didn't even keep me any. In a few days, it's forgotten, when vaguely in my peripheral vision comes the lump of your body being dragged out to the landing. They explain, slowly, how you can't call an ambulance here because the police follow, that they always leave the ODs outside at someone else's door. Propped 4 floors up at a grey brick wall, in the lilac twilight with bluing lips, not breathing. You look so peaceful, I start screaming. There's a dark satisfaction in slapping your flaccid face like returning an unwanted gift. Hitting harder, I hear myself beg, wake up, wake up, wake up, but you won't. Lights swing and swoop across the car park far below, wink blue and orange, and I'm wrenched off you, pulled inside, the door held shut and hushed. We listen. You are left out, exposed to the sky, crows, and paramedics. Through the hours that follow, hearing nothing, you are both dead and alive. Not knowing which, you can be either at the same time. Our child sleeps, simultaneously in a state of having a father and not. And this last one, I actually read it recently for Culture Night, but I'm going to read it again because of the week that's in it. Today, my middle child is literally moving into her college accommodation and leaving home for the first time, and she's the second one to leave. But thankfully, there's one left, so that's good. But so this is really about having to let them sail out the window. Anyway, so I'll finish with that one, and I'd like to say thanks to Nessa and Peter and Phil and everybody else. Balloon. You are made up of my breath. You tingle and grow, swell, stretch, change, become almost unrecognizable. Taut, sensitive, scarily vulnerable, I watch out for sharpness, fire, claws, glass, dreading the sound of a bang. You have a life of your own, seem too big for this house. I let you out, watch you drift across a vast sky, and can only hope you stay intact when you pass out of sight. Hope that you are glad of the breath I gave you when you start to wizen and shrink.
Thank you very much, Jessamine, and anyway, at least be able to keep in touch with Zoom when they leave the nest. But good luck with the launch, by the way. Hopefully it all goes ahead smoothly next month. Okay, we're at the halfway point, and next up we have John McAuliffe. John is an award-winning poet whose 5th book of poetry, The Kabul Olympics, was published by Gallery Press in April of this year, 2020. And it was chosen as a Guardian Poetry Book of the Month in May. So he's also been widely published in literary journals. And John works as Professor of Poetry at the University of Manchester. John McAuliffe.
Thanks very much, Phil. And I'm very sorry that I'm not in Bray. My sister lives in Greystones, and I was hoping I was going to be able to fit in a family visit as well as the festival this weekend. But we've been in Manchester for the duration and unable to leave this island since March. I'm going to read 4 poems from the Kabul Olympics, which, as Phil said, came out in April. The first poem I'm going to read is, it's called The Blackbird, and it describes the house I'm sitting in now and that I'm reading to you from, and which the kind of way we've all become so familiar with these our domestic spaces over the last 6 months. The Blackbird. The day's white internal door opens onto a kitchen full of what's been before. The kettle steaming up the radio. Phone chirps, clatter of spoons, fridge hum. The order of things surviving my wakeful nighttime reckonings. Each hour hard to pin down as a handful of water. Each morning, each year, echoing another I am slow to recognize. And then, between the pips, there is the air's stillness, into which a blackbird submits the sweetest single high and overlaying sound a minute admits. Rising away as I slope out of the morning to the end of its ropey going hope, a creature of its mid-air qualms, its clustered notes and afterthoughts and here I ams. The book, the Kabul Olympics, crosses over a lot of other places that meet in Manchester, including the Irish immigrant community, which I'm part of. One of the events that has most dominated the city in the last few years has been the bombing of the Manchester Arena, which brought the different communities together and made the city come together in a different way, maybe than it had done, than cities do usually. So I'm going to read a poem, a longish poem about that. And of course, I was very interested that it was the two men who were convicted now, the two brothers, the Abedi brothers, were from the Libyan community in the city, and the mosque where they attended is around the corner from where we live in South Manchester. But I was also very conscious of the Libyan, about Libya, how Libya featured in Ireland, and about the IRA gun running I'm thinking of in the 1980s, which Gaddafi was involved with. And I'm going to read after this a poem which involves the X and which has a Bray connection as well. But this first poem is called City of Trees, 22nd of May 2017, and it has two epigraphs. The first from Philip Larkin, their greenness is a kind of grief, and the other from Oscar Wilde, I would give Manchester back to the shepherds. At the town hall valedictory do the curator's art in parks, her metal tree, and the gallery's diversity get credit which she abjures. Look is the residue of design, a quote which around the room sparks applause, not for herself or the line, nor of course the fact that she is heading south, but that it asks for this new order to be acknowledged and sees the city's sprawl as managed. Cycling back under the candled chestnuts, past the gallery and through the Curry Miles neon influence, its last two Irish pubs, the Clarence and the Whitworth, refitted now as a Christian cafe and a chrome and glass. The crowd is nothing on the night 20,000 Libyans gathered at the southern end celebrating the death of Gaddafi, hours after it was announced on the BBC, whose old beehive building they'd camped beside in protests for months. Fireworks, flags, biscuit tin drums and gunshots, a party for the ages, like that afternoon on the allotment, digging in the spuds when the neighbourly encore of cheers rolled in. Aguero going global on the end of Balotelli's flick, City going wild, submerging in its element those who'd once thought otherwise. Mental. By the time I got home, the news had pictures. A roadblock, ambulances and squad cars pulled up outside the arena. Overnight, it was first numbers, then names, and the council leader on the town hall steps in the same shirt I'd seen him in 12 hours earlier, and the mayor taking the microphone to promise business as usual, and not exactly steely line he would repeat. Likewise, the city will not be divided and goes from strength to strength. A man is arrested outside the Morrisons in Chorlton. The door is blown in Fallowfield, where the Lebo cargo van would park. White police trucks mark the corners. At a concert, I dismantle the book bag I've lugged from work, while the metal detector queue slows and meanders. The summer nights demand updates. We write to friends about our kids, the schools stay open, as they process classmates' tales of sleeping in a hotel overnight. The footage of a man with luggage on wheels buying bits and pieces in a corner shop circulates. this watchful ex-student born here, ill at ease, walking through the May weeks of the trees' slow green explosions, the air thick with willow pollen and honeysuckle, all invisible in the grayscale's pixel rendering of the place, scrambling it, even as crowds gather elsewhere, in shops and bars and streets, to shoot the breeze, watch a match on telly and follow their phones as I do, student of uprootings and aftermath, hemmed in by the information which descends on us like summer rain, the stories and images as much a distraction as each attempt to make it all align, the sequence getting out of order which would track us as we move on from the rooms and fields and trees of the city's 100 towns, whose separating griefs harden and endure. So one of the counterpart poems is a sequence in the book called The Harbours, which looks at some of these boats which were coming into Ireland from various quarters in the 1980s. And this one describes the Exund, which left Bray. And it was referred to in one of the newspaper reports as having a, when it was captured, as having a breathtaking manifest, which seemed an unusually accurate quotation for what was on board. So I'm going to read the manifest and then one more poem from this sequence, The Harbours. The bankrupt travel agent bought them the Exund and took a cut. He said he was to hand over £700,000 in plastic bags, and more personal, a double bed, a large clock, olive oil, and a German shepherd flown from Frankfurt to Valletta, the boat's last recorded port. The sea was too rocky, so they docked and loaded at the military harbour in Tripoli. Spotted departing, observed daily from the air, tailed, surrounded. The engineer wanted it to go down like lead, to scuttle the boat off the Breton coast. But he misfired the one faulty timer in a breathtaking manifest which the authorities would piece together in unbombed cities. 1 million rounds of ammunition, guns, missiles to beat the band, and 2 tons of odourless Semtex instead of its advertised cargo of grain. The mooted attacks, a Tet offensive, went west, like an empty boat drifting between wave and wave. And I'm going to finish with a translation of 2 short passages from the Aeneid, where Virgil lands his hero on the coast of Libya, where it becomes this idealized safe haven. The heat and noise of gatherings outside, then lightning. Like violence breaking through a rabble, boys and men, stones and worse fired into the air. And where's the swaying voice whose speech and veteran record they know and trust? Who can calm them and advise that there will be another day into which he'll walk with them? What will suffice to make them listen and stop? Just then the sea straightened out into a mirror as its maker turned and oversaw their route to land under blue and clearing sky. Aeneas and his crew were set for Libya, a haven, a breakwater where the swells subside, drawing ships into a curving inlet, rugged sandstone pocked by the Gibli, narrowing to a quiet grotto, above which, a miracle, leafy fringes of pine, juniper, cypress, olive, the outer edge of a coastal oasis joined to the caves by a freshwater spring which ladders the living rock. This is the place whose natural shelving ledges the wood nymphs love, where anchors wade, ships come to rest, and weary sailors lift their hands and praise the gods. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Some very topical work there, and was reference to travels. Makes us hope we all get to Bray sometime soon again. Thank you very much. Now, our penultimate reader is Una Nicali. Una's poetry has been published in the Irish Times, the North, the Stony Thursday Book, Orbis, Poetry Salzburg, and the anthology from a few years ago from Ireland, House Washing Windows. Her collection, Salamander Crossing, was published by Lapwing in 2011, and she holds an MA in creative writing from University College Cork. Una Nicali.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, to be taking part in this literary salon, and I'm grateful to the Bray Literary Festival for giving me the opportunity to read from Memoir de Monte de Vergue. It's a poetic sequence inspired by the life and works of the French sculptor Camille Claudel. Born in 1864, she died in Monte de Vergue Asylum in 1943, having spent 30 years there. She was committed by her family following bouts of depression and withdrawal. Despair and frustration at being excluded from the academy and refusals to grant her a license to have her work commissioned led her to destroy many sculptures at her studio in 90 Quai de Bourbon in Paris. I've chosen a short sequence of 7 poems to read this evening. This work is driven by the desire to give Camille her own voice. More often than not, she is spoken of in the context of the sculptor Auguste Rodin, her teacher and former lover. The poems are her reflections. She often refers to the sculptures she did not destroy. The visit of Jessie Lipscomb, the English sculptor she shared a studio with in the 1880s, prompts her memory. "19 Quai de Bourbon. I paid the carter with what little money I'd left. Headless torsos, shattered limbs. My life's work for nothing, taken away on a horse-drawn cart. In the moment I grasped the claw hammer, I knew this act would haunt me to my grave. By night I walked the quay, throwing last fragments in the Seine. Such deeds would count for madness in their eyes. Interned, I am growing old, and like the man we're shown, sitting at eternity's gate, sadness bears me down." From Monte de Vergue Asylum. Times when it's so hard I cannot bear it. I rub stale bread between my fingers, feel the curve of cold tin plates. My hands longing for clay to mould the pain, to cast their vacant eyes, their bitten nails. I gave my hands, my young body to Rodin. You'll find them burning at the gates of hell. Ma mère, my mother. I did not sense her death, and when I try to find one beam of recollection, there is nothing. I will not allow bitterness to haunt me here. 15 years and more without seeing her face. My love of clay, my love of him, always that wall between us. And she is committed now to earth, my chosen mother. The keeper rakes the soil, smooths its surface before the darkness comes. So many days without light, yet I can see the changing skies. Imagine myself walking beyond these asylum walls, or forever in that far-side dream, raking burnt embers and ash. Jessie's visit, Monte de Vergue, 1929. Silence when she left. She took my laughter with her to tell the world that I am sane. We laughed like the girls we were in those Colarossi days, drinking English tea from Jessie's china cups in our studio in Notre Dame des Champs. She helped me remember what I chose to forget. The London exhibition at the Royal, her terracotta piece called Sans Souci, and the plaster portrait of me she wrapped in her mother's best damask cloth for fear that I might break. He spoke with gentle words of broken dreams, how she found love back then, and I could not. She'd tell the world that I'm not mad, let them see that they are wrong. But will they listen? L'âge mûr, the mature age. To mark this moment, your husband took our photograph. We are sitting together, our backs to crumbling plaster, neglected, needing a sculptor's touch. Just given the chance, what we would have done with it. This image will outlive us. Two women of mature age, but what will the eye see? One with eyes open, looking at him behind the lens, and the other, her dulled windows without light. Would they even notice who was free, who was not? If only I could once more sculpt this reflection I see in rainwater, for there are no mirrors here. It would be what I imagined then, the face of the old woman I'd held between my hands. La vague, the wave. I managed to hold back this ocean until my only visitors had gone, but now the waves resurge, unable to find sleep, even a little rest. This life of loneliness, my mother's only bequest. And all that's left will be found, forgotten on the shore. Comme les trois destins. Young women dancing naked beneath the swell of blue on screen, their bodies golden. The last Medusa. I am still holding the hammer, hearing its first blow, the fury as her head crashes to the floor, shattering like a quake through all these losses. Doors closed, work uncast. Afraid to look the Gorgon in the eye, he kept his back turned to me, the invisible mirror held by its shaft. Snake tendrils crawling at my feet. I struck the blows, the final blows of obliteration. My body, my mind, all lost in rising dust. But all was not lost. In her lifetime, yes, but not in ours. Musée Camille Claudel was opened in 2017 in Nogent-sur-Seine, where Camille had lived for a time. And the museum is totally dedicated to her sculptures and to hers alone. So, thanks.
Thank you, Una. It's fascinating. And your voice has certainly given life to her voice. Thanks very much for that. So, suddenly, hey presto, we're at the final reader. And pleased to introduce Olivia Fitzsimons, blessed among poets. She's going to give us some prose. Olivia is Irish Writers Centre Novel Fair winner for 2020. She was an Irish Writers Centre Kilreally Writers Residency recipient in 2019, and she featured in the fiction at the Farry New Writer Showcase at Cork Short Story Festival in 2018. She's currently working on her debut novel. Olivia Fitzsimons.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you everyone for reading. It's been so enjoyable to listen. I wanted to thank Tanya, David, Nessa, Patrick and the entire committee from Bray Literary Festival for having us today. I'm going to read an extract from my novel, which is called The Quiet Whispers Never Stop. It's about a mother, Nuala, and her daughter, Sam, who have an affair with the same man, 12 years apart. I'm going to read the opening chapter and a small section from Nuala. The opening chapter is called Patsy's Side of the Mountain. She was such a difficult girl. He never asked for such a difficult girl. Sam was spoilt. He indulged her too much, all the bloody time. Questions, fucking why this and that and what and where and how, and your head would explode with the not knowing of it all. Like her mother, he supposed. Patsy said he hadn't known, and that should have been enough. Everybody knew Fionnuala was a highly strung woman, but he loved her. Always did, always would. Maybe he should have told her more often, but he was not one for much talking. Maybe not much for a drink either, and that made him what? Suspicious? Because he was a pioneer and went to mass every Sunday and could still outrun a man 20 years his junior? The papers said he was a karate champion. Karate. What kind of stupid ignoramus printed that? They couldn't get their facts right. Judo. It was the judo that he had the black belt in. That morning, he'd gone out to bring in the cows as usual and taken the wee lad with him. John Paul loved the cows. He could see the gentleness in his son's hand, steady, measured even as a toddler. He'd be a good farmer one day, take over the place. He carried the wee lad on his shoulders down in the early light, both of them munching on 2 hard toast, just passable for a first breakfast. He threw out the drop of cold tea from his tin cup as they arrived in the shed, wooden slants rising solid against the upcoming sky. Sat the wee fellow on the corner of the pillar. Pure excitement rose in his son's eyes as the cows started to come in, driven by routine and smell of their masters. Usually, it barely took a call for them to come with their ungainly fat horse cantering, but that morning, there was a desperate lowing. The cow and calf had stayed in the corner of the field. A few others gathered round her. He could see she needed help, but he got the rest in first and sorted them for milking as quick as he could. He thought about going up to the house and getting his wife, but then the daughter would come, and she was so skittish, nothing would settle around her. So instead, he tucked the wee boy under his arm against him, his hip flask of a child, and marched down thinking his son would remember this, the smell of birth and the feeling of easing a living thing into this world. That was something, really something that, the real cut of that. They would always have this together, even if his son didn't remember, and even if Patsy eventually forgot. It would be inside them, marked like the coloured dip on his neighbour's sheep, the red daub of living. Except the cow did not look so good when he got there, lying on her side, low, low breaths, dangerously low. He placed his son tenderly on the ground beside her head, and the child instinctively put his small hands on her face, rubbed their length down her nose like a little prayer, and he smiled at how right he was about the boy. As he did so, he felt the warm ooze along her belly, slick on his hands. She was sliced, not wide open, but enough. Patsy reached inside the mother and found nothing, no calf. The boy was standing in a pool of blood, his pajama bottoms soaking it up like a paper towel on a kitchen spill. The light was coming up and around now as he searched the field for the newborn calf. In the half light, he saw a heap of twisted, broken legs and blood, and he tucked the boy tight into himself despite his protests and headed over. He had never seen such destruction. The animal had been kicked, limbs contorted into a natural mess. The boy twisted around to look, and Patsy felt his little body shake. So he pushed his son's face firm to his shoulder to stifle his cry, backed away, headed towards the shed, all the time holding his son rope tight. When they got back, Patsy fished a sweet from his coat pocket and bribed the boy to stop the onslaught of tears. He took him to the tap outside. There was a nub of soap hung on mangled blue biner twine by the wall, but not enough to get the blood from both the cracks of their hands. He focused on washing his son's soft, tiny palms, checked the animals again. He figured whoever did this was long gone. He fetched the gun from the cupboard, relieved it was still there, and loaded it carefully. The boy watched him religiously. Every click and lever made his eyes pop. It was never the right time for this, but he took his son's hand and they strode back across the field, lit by a sun so bright it made his eyes water. That's what he told himself. He had never enjoyed this part, putting something out of its misery. He was glad his daughter was asleep in her bed. Sam would have made a scene. That girl would be curled up inside her mother still, absorbing all the love Nuala had to give if JP hadn't come along. Sam was soft. His son too, but that would be gone now. 2 was young, but he'd been about the same age when they put his father's horse down. It was his father had done it. His dad cried after, and Patsy never saw him shed a tear for another living thing. He didn't know his father could feel regret until that point. It was a piece of his owl feather that he had wanted to see more of, but it never happened again. Patsy checked his watch, no point waiting. He dragged the boy, who was gurning now, tired and hungry, cold, he supposed, across the open field. He would do this, then drop the boy into his mother and finish up. Call the vet later for the death cert, get the paperwork in order for the insurance. Get the police up to the yard for all the good they would do. They never seemed to be able to catch anyone for anything around here. He reached the cow, felt her breath almost gone now. Seemed ashamed to waste a bullet, but still, she could go on for another hour like this. The boy was talking to her, singing something soft and low. Old MacDonald, he thought. Say goodbye now, son, he said. The boy's puzzled face shut up, holding all the innocence he would ever have in that moment. The boy hesitated, and Patsy swept him up with one hand, tucked the boy in between his legs, trapped him, the child squirming, then without pause cocked the rifle and fired. The echo of the shot mingled with the child's cries of fear and shock, but it was done. The cow was gone. Now, there's not a thing wrong with you. Away on that. You're all right, stop it. He gathered him up and marched back up the field towards the house. Only his mother would do now. Only his mother would stop the sobbing that he could not stand. The wailing of his children was a thing he could not abide. And I'm going to read a very tiny chapter from Mother, who's called Nuala. It's called Sediment, and it's set in 1982. The children are like gold, and I'm the stream. Sometimes I flow away alone, but in the morning I wake up and there they are, deposited around me, one carved into my back, the other under my chin, my arms like low branches around each, entwining them to my heart. I fear for the day they don't settle with me, but slip upstream and out to the wide, wild world. I fear and I yearn for it, remembering that I want them to leave me as much as I desire them into this world. I deposit stones of discomfort and stir up the sediments of their heart, muddy all ahead of them. But for now, they slow at my bend in the river and settle into my sides, little slips of love and want and need until they outgrow me, are mine no longer, and we slide back into sleep.
Thanks very much, Olivia. You've whetted our appetite, so we look forward to seeing the completed work soon. Best of luck with it. So yeah, that completes the readings, and thank you all very much. And just to say who you all were that I'm thanking, we started off with Fred Johnson, followed by Michael Farry, Jessamine O'Connor, John McAuliffe, Una Kelly, and Olivia Fitzsimons. And I suppose if we were in the old normal, we'd be in a room or preferably a bar somewhere in Bray, and there'd be merchandise available, not the stuff from behind the bar, but merchandise belonging to the writers. So I'd urge you all to, our viewers, to check out what you've just got as a snapshot or a thumbnail, obviously. And thank you all, by the way, for staying to the time, which was great. But please check out their websites, their social media channels, wherever you can find them, including the shelves of all good bookshops for most of them, and those who are about to publish as well. So that's all. I should also say thanks to our sponsors, make reference to them. Without them, we wouldn't even be Zooming, not to mention anywhere else. It's the Arts Council, the Open University Ireland, the Mermaid Arts Centre, Wicklow County Council, A+ Service Centre Bray, Dublin One City One Book, Stinging Fly, and the Arts Council of Northern Ireland have all been involved in sponsoring Bray Literary Festival 2020, and some other partners as well. They're all listed anyway on the website, brayliteraryfestival.com. I should say thanks to our hidden crew, Nessa and Peter, who have made this all possible. Thank you very much. And finally, just to mention our next event up on this channel will be, well, it's billed as a north-side, south-side face-off featuring Roddy and Paul, also known as Roddy Dial and Paul Howard, aka Ross O'Carroll Kelly. David Butler will be the man in the middle for that, and it's not to be missed, I think. I'm certainly looking forward to it. And all the programme details are on the website, brayliteraryfestival.com, and other social media platforms. That's it. Just remains for me to sign off and to thank you all again. Thanks to our viewers for staying with us and supporting the festival in these strangest of strange times. And yeah, that's it. Stay well, stay safe, and until we all meet in Bray sometime in the future, all the best.